Well, our initial brief was slightly different. We were actually asked in by a group called the ECR Shrinkage and On-Shelf Availability Group, which is a European-wide community, to look at the total cost of returns, to see whether we could see the best practice that was happening, to see where the gaps were. But as a result of that project, not only did we discover these issues with calculating the cost of returns, we also identified a number of reasons why this was happening, which led us to look at the lean management of returns, which is where we start to overlap with your findings, John. And we also realised it's not just a cost to the business, that it's an income generating opportunity as well. And this also then took us into the circular economy. So in the end, our final report was very detailed, but the gist of it was, in fact, if you treat returns as a profit centre, you've got both income and expenditure. You've got opportunities for maximising the benefits, and you can't turn a loss into a profit, but you can actually minimise the loss. So it is generating, and in fact one of the organisations we worked with call it profit enhancement rather than loss management. At the moment we're still developing the cost. We've had a prototype cost model which we're now working with retailers to try and refine or change as needed. Well, this was what we found was interesting, because there is this concept of lean management in retail, but it's very forward-looking. And if you think about it, under lean management rules, you would expect there to be no returns or very few returns, because if you're getting it right first time. But in fact, there isn't. And what we found is that the reverse logistics system is not managed with the same principles. We came across one best case study where they were applying some lean management principles to the management of returns. But when we looked into it a bit further, we found, well, there's actually no concept of lean returns management. And that would be about minimising waste, including time. It would be about optimising ideas with people. It would be about not having more transactions than you needed. And what we found was the reverse logistics for returns is actually quite complicated. And there's quite a lot of scope in there to reduce cost if you could cut down the number of transactions. But we only got as far as recommending a mapping tool at this stage. It's hopefully our next project along the line to look into that a bit more deeply. And again, it's something we may be able to do in conjunction with the work at Sheffield.
People will return products because they're not fit for purpose, they're not working. And that's the bit in a manufacturing sense, if you go back, they've not been manufactured correctly, or the instructions to operate the equipment aren't there, if you're talking about televisions or something like that. But most of the returns now are actually because people try clothes on, they buy them online, they don't fit, they send them back, so that's a return. There's nothing wrong with the product, but I think a lot of retailers now are working on particularly in online, is how do we avoid returns, and this can be part of a lean process. How do we actually avoid them? So Juliana, if you're buying something online, how can the retailer make what they're offering more suitable to you? And there's lots of things now happening within the sector, particularly on the online sector, where they will try and ensure that what you're buying is what you really want, in terms of size, fit, colour, whatever.
One thing our cost model shows is the most effective way of reducing your cost of returns is to reduce the rate of return. Whilst at the same time keeping the customer experience. And that's a very difficult thing to manage. And of course with online returns you have a legal right to return just for change of mind within a period as well. So that's part of the return side, but the other side is also the company itself thinking about how would the returns best suit their system. So where can you get a win-win?
Yes.
Or where at least can you get something that is acceptable to both sides? Because I think at the moment the tendency is to offer all options and then just to find out some way of managing them when they come through. Whereas actually a lean thinking would say, well, how do we best need to do this? And I think an example would be Amazon. Not that they were part of our project, but because they're a very well-known example. Yes. And they are purely online, more or less. They actually have really streamlined the process by which you can make a return in a way that suits them, but isn't actually very difficult for the customer to carry out. And that's the sort of win you want. You want to be able to channel those returns back in the most effective way for yourself, but which is actually quite simple for the customer to operate, and then they don't necessarily need X number of ways of returning the items. So I think there's a lot about clarity of communication is part of the return idea of lean returns as well.
Yeah.
But quite simply, there's also some scope for just cutting down the number of transactions and steps in the process, which is just basic management.
And I think that's really quite crucial. And again, accountants can get involved very much in that process as part of a wider team. It's kind of an opportunity for retailers to sell products through different channels. And online, obviously, you've got the bricks and mortar, you've got the online. Some organisations use both, but interestingly, from an accounting perspective, if you're looking at, and Lisa mentioned kind of profitability, profit responsibilities, if you've got a profit centre or returns as a profit centre. One of the things that you need to think about is how do you measure, or not measure, but follow the costs through. If you've got an online store of selling the goods, but the return products go to the bricks and mortar store, how do you then measure the profitability of the different channels? Because you're actually incurring costs within, within the bricks and mortar store, but they're not getting the benefit of the sale. And it's how do you do that? And I think there's a real role for accountants in dealing with that. Because otherwise you've got no idea really about the profitability of different distribution channels. And I think that's a really crucial area for accountants to get involved in, to understand. Because if you're talking about responsibility centres, actually responsibility centres mean that you've got to be quite savvy about where the revenue comes in, where the costs are going, etc., etc. Because if managers are made responsible for that unit, accounting can really follow those kind of costs. So I think omni-channel, many people argue that omni-channel has increased the level of returns because more people are buying stuff online. But where you've got an online retailer only, that's online. But where you've got bricks and mortar and online, you've got issues around click and collect, a whole range of things. And I feel that accountants can play a really important role in terms of looking at the costs and then looking at ways you can reduce the cost within that process.
I also think that omni-channel is actually quite aspirational. What we have at the moment is multi-channel.
Yes, yeah.
Because if it's omni-channel, you've got something very seamless.
Yeah.
And at the moment, it's not. There's nothing else. We have computer systems that don't talk to each other very well yet because they've been built in a piecemeal way. And a lot of that's about finding the software to make different systems talk to each other. So there's a lot of opportunity there. But this idea of omni-channel, that you can do anything, anywhere, and the systems will respond in real time, is quite a long way off. And it's not helped by the fact that most people have developed, say, they've had a traditional bricks and mortar store, they've developed the online on top of that, and maybe some other channels. Then they've incorporated all these different ways of returning the product through third parties, post. store, on, you know. So what we have is multi-channel that's built up with multiple systems, but we're omni-channel is quite a smooth thing. It's quite seamless,
word,
which is, I don't think many people have achieved as yet.